So it's been a couple of weeks since the election, but I know many of my friends and colleagues are still feeling pretty raw. What about you guys? Truthfully, my head is still spinning. I spent 2 days after the election feeling numb, just numb. And then I got scared by all the things that my bubble of friends and the news media was telling me was going to happen. But over the last couple weeks, the more I read the reflections and opinions of many respected columnists, I began to see things a little bit differently. Now, this is my story. I'm not here to tell you that you should feel the same way that I do. I'm just here to share my thoughts. You see, I have a personal story that's been pressing hard against my heart for a while now, and it frames my way of seeing some things. I have a family member who supports things I find hard to believe. She supports a man I cannot respect. And when we've talked together over the last 8 years, it has become tense at times. And sometimes we say things to each other that we regret later. And I'm embarrassed to admit that's true. Do any of you have relationships like this? And me, I'm a minister. I'm supposed to be better than that. But I'm not. I'm human, and I feel like too much has been on the line lately. And to be truthful, I think she feels the same way. This is a sister who I shared a room with for most of my childhood, playing games and swooning over the Monkees and the Beatles. So we listened to their latest albums. I liked Mickey and she liked Davy. I liked George and she liked Paul. She and I formed a neighborhood rock band with the other girls, and we lip synced to a Partridge Family album that we played on an old school record player. And we charged the neighborhood kids 5 cents to come see our show. We built a car out of an old refrigerator box, and we put a playphone inside the glove box, which back then would have been very glamorous. And we were spies in that car. We were movie stars. As we got older, we would ride our bikes to the diner where our older sister worked part-time, and we would devour turtle sundaes together. She taught me a lot about kindness. She was the best gift giver because she listened carefully throughout the year. And her Christmas gift was always the best one because she had heard me tell my heart's desires. And I love her. I do. She's my sister. It's as simple as that. We have a story together much longer, much happier, and more intertwined than any political party or any political candidate. She is pro-choice, and she's very insistent about vaccines during COVID, so she's definitely not far right. But we've been butting heads a lot lately. And so I wrestled, wanting to return to that easy relationship we once had and biting my tongue and raging silently inside. Neither one seemed to be working. I officiated at my mother-in-law's memorial service this past summer. She had been a challenging woman on many levels. Sadly, she began to suffer mini strokes during her last 2 weeks of life, and she lost her ability to speak. There were so many things to be said, and there she was, unable to say them. Now, as a retired hospice chaplain, one of the things I tried hard to do was to help people process through seeking forgiveness for wrongs they may have done, forgiving others for harm they may have caused, and then saying, I love you, thank you, and lastly, of course, goodbye. That's a lot, I know. Some patients were the types of people who had very open hearts and said those words often, and for them there was nothing left unsaid. Their passings were often serene with loved ones sitting bedside, holding their hands. Others, well, they couldn't fit their mouths around those kinds of words. They let shame and pride clog up their throats. Others were rightfully unable to let go of unimaginable damage. Others were emotionally unaware to even know that these words held any special meaning. Many folks had so much damage between them that no one could imagine any other way of being together. And that is what it is. You can't make people do something they can't or they won't. At my mother-in-law's memorial, I shared how sad it was that she was not even able to say, I love you or goodbye at the end. And she had been a teacher. And I told the gathered crowd that I believe she was still teaching us in her passing. She was telling us that we should be saying those words to each other daily, if need be. I think it could be helpful in these tense times. Imagine if we said these kind of words to each other more often on a daily basis, such as, forgive me. Sorry I bit your head off this morning. I slept terribly last night. Or, I forgive you. I know you didn't mean what you said when we argued yesterday. Or, I love how you're always here for me. Or, thanks for making dinner tonight. That was really helpful. So I went home from that memorial service, and my own words were pressing on my heart. I thought a lot about my sister. I felt that these were words I needed to say to her, especially with the upcoming election. And so over a month ago, I reached out to her, and I told her I was sorry for any time I had hurt her feelings or made her feel uncomfortable, as that had never been my intention. Although upon writing all of this, if truth be told, looking back, I probably was trying to make her feel uncomfortable, thinking if she was uncomfortable, she might understand what I was saying. Listen to me, we want to shout. Can't you see that you've lost your mind? I suspect we both thought that if we talked at each other long enough, we would finally see eye to eye. It never worked. Instead, anger, fear, and even disgust began to pile up between us. Truth be told, we thought the words we threw at one another would somehow help. So I said new words to her. I asked her to forgive me for not really seeing her fully, but only seeing what I assumed about her. I also told her I forgave her for the times I felt triggered by things that she verbally threw at me. She chuckled softly, and then she agreed 100%. And we told each other that we loved one another and how stupid it was for us to let politics and candidates get in between our important relationship. And then I swear, literally 2 minutes later, she began repeating a lie that she had heard so often in her circles that she believed it was truth. I tried to interject. I tried to state the truth about this lie, but she just kept talking. And I ended up shouting her name. We were on the phone. I was trying to get her to stop. Eventually, she heard me, and she did. Again, not my finest hour as a retired hospice chaplain. We calmed down. We talked some more. We agreed that maybe we shouldn't talk about politics as our emotions were running pretty high so close to the election. And it went well. We've had some great conversations about our lives, our kids, upcoming trips, and holidays since then. But then the election happened. I confess we haven't talked about that yet because I'm not even sure what I would say. The first thing that comes to mind is, well, I hope you're right about what you hope will happen. But that might not be so helpful. I've read numerous articles in the last few weeks about what experts thought happened. It was Biden's fault. It was Harris's fault. It was faulty polls. It was Democrats not showing up enough. But many Democrats and pundits are also saying that working class people felt alienated by the Democratic Party and walked away. In my mind, I thought it would only be MAGA supporters that would vote for Trump. But demographically, it was shocking to see how many other folks also supported him, winning every swing state along with the popular vote. This was more than just core supporters. Democratic State Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez of a very rural and red district of Washington State was not surprised by this at all. In fact, she expected it. She works hard in her district to connect to working class folks, the undereducated, and low-income families. And she won her red district again because of her attention and relationship building efforts with conservatives. She'll often reach across the aisle when it makes sense for her district. She says the biggest mistakes Democrats made during this past election was condescension. She feels that elected officials often get oblivious to ways that they are disrespecting people. For example, our current president proudly dismissed student loans for thousands, and liberals hailed his efforts. But imagine how you might feel if you could never afford college, or barely got through a tech school or a 2-year program, and now you're supposed to be thrilled that folks who have more education than you are getting their loans forgiven. Working class people may look at that and think it's another example of elite privilege. Gluesenkamp Perez feels that we've been ignoring and wallpapering over a large majority of people's lived experiences of struggle in low-paying jobs with constant transportation inequalities in rural areas and with folks regularly putting their groceries on credit each week because there's not enough money to cover them. That hit me pretty hard. I guess I just believe the joy and energy and inclusiveness of my party's campaign was a zillion times better than the dark and fearful campaign the other side seemed to have. But if I'm honest, my daily life is not that dark or fearful. I'm white. I'm well educated. I'm also financially stable. I had not been listening. I confess I tuned out most of the opposing party, especially the folks deep down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories. But I confess that after a while, I began to identify almost all of the right to be just that. Of course, there was a few I respected, but soon seeing a larger than needed political sign or a flag flying off the back of a pickup truck would trigger to me to make assumptions about them without even having met them. I'll be honest, I can't tolerate their candidate. I'm pretty sure I will not change my mind about that in the next 4 years, and I still can't comprehend their votes. But I'm beginning to think that our failure to really understand and listen to the working class may have led us here. And then I wonder, how are we as a country going to get through the next 4 years? This month's theme is repair. And I can't help, at least for me, that this word is referring to repairing relationships with our families, our neighbors, our coworkers, and our community after all of our divisiveness in the last 8 to 10 years. Admit it, as a nation, we cannot go on like this. And for repair to truly happen, I think the key focus should be on listening, really listening. New York Times columnist Nicholas Kristof lives in rural Oregon, and he says the working class rejected the Democratic Party because, like folks in his community, many are struggling to pay their rent and they're buying gas $5 at a time. Meanwhile, to them, it seemed that all Democrats were concerned with were issues around pronouns and identity. Now, let me be clear, I am not demeaning the importance of anyone's identity or right to be called what they prefer. And trust me, I have trans friends who are seriously concerned for their lives right now. But if you're struggling to put food on the table, your thoughts might go in a different direction. Many of us live in cocoons of our own creation with friends and activities that align us with people like us. I wonder if we have really understood the life story of a large number of folks in our country. Did you know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics shares that blue-collar workers were actually earning more on average in 1972, adjusting for inflation, than they are now in 2024? What that means is today's blue-collar workers are on average earning less in real dollars than their grandparents were 52 years ago. That's pretty shocking. Christoph says he truly believes Democrats have far better policies for working class Americans, and I would also agree. But he says these policies are often rejected by the working class when they're presented by university-educated elites who sadly have a knack for coming across as remote and patronizing. And then it's often followed up by scorn for their religious beliefs that for many folks serve as a source of assurance during difficult times. Imagine if that was happening to us. Time and time again in these past weeks, I've come across articles sharing these same thoughts about why so many folks in our country voted as they did. Many folks did not feel seen or heard. And it caused me to really pause. It reminded me of a comment that I heard from another one of my family members a while ago. She shared with me that sometimes my sister felt I was condescending when I talked about my political beliefs. I thought I had been standing up for things that mattered and were important, but I realized I was not finding out what mattered and was important to her, and she felt demeaned. Nicholas Kristof shared that during all these years of division, many of us felt conservatives were deserving of being demeaned. Ouch. I think we're all a little guilty of that, enjoying conversations with one another, like-minded family and friends, as we ridiculed the other. I know I did. So obviously, we all have work to do. Surprisingly, abortion rights held strong even in states that we did not expect. People surprised us as they voted to keep and support abortion rights in their states or expanded the length of time that abortions could be obtained. It seems that that was not the issue that divided us like we thought. Yet I still confess I worry about this threat to women that young men are tossing around recently, saying, "Your body, my choice." After conversations with many other folks, I heard similar desires to repair our relationships with the working class. And it's very magnanimous to admit out loud, okay, we messed up. We left you behind as we raced forward with all our politically correct language and hopeful ideas for curing society's ills. But here's the thing about being magnanimous to the other. In terms of extending the olive branch, it's the easiest and the safest response. But actually, all it accomplishes is it makes us feel better. It doesn't actually change anything. And I'm going to say something you might not like to hear. But I think you do that a lot. Put a lot of talk into wanting to understand and to be inclusive to all people, which should include conservatives and evangelical Christians. But we often aren't really interested in doing the hard work of understanding where they're coming from and why. And if we hold to that continued way of being, that kind of thinking will continue to get us nowhere. I think we are better than that. You know we are better than that. So I stand here in front of you to say, I have work to do. I have work to do, not only with my sister, but with my conservative neighbors and folks in my community. If I really want to understand and create any actual meaningful conversations, and then after those meaningful conversations and connections with those folks, that's when we can start working together toward meaningful change. Both of our parties ran ahead without including any input from the other. And I think we've spent far too long trying to correct each other, trying to sell each other, trying to change their thinking so that they would finally understand that all we really want is to build a better world. We say that all the time here. But I wonder, is that just the world we think we should have? Have we asked what they think is important, what they really need to feel respected, to feel safe, to be heard? I know I haven't done that with my sister. I know I haven't done it with my neighbor. And I think I need to. So, what if we're brave enough to do just that? To start small in our circle of loving. And then the more we learn, the broader we make that circle. I know I will be adding deep listening to the things I will do to keep myself sane in the next 4 years. I can't control what this new president may do, but I do plan to reach out and listen with respect and not dismiss those who think differently than me. I'll also work hard in my community to protect those who are the most vulnerable right now, especially our GLBTQ population, women and immigrants. We, as a community, will need to offer them a safe place to be and to offer them more support and protection in the next 4 years. There's no denying that these will be hard times for those folks. This fellowship, you people, here in this room, you are going to be so desperately needed to provide a place of love and support. I'm also determined to limit my media use, reminding myself that real change does not happen in a daily news cycle, but actually is measured in years. In turn, I'll fill that space and time with more outdoor time. That's where I feel connected and where I feel is sacred. I'll do more community volunteer work, and I'll have more time for centering myself. This isn't our first rodeo with this president. Last time we didn't know what to expect. Now we kind of do. And I think for myself, I need to center myself, ground myself more. David Blankenhorn, president of Braver Angels, a citizens group working to bridge the partisan divide in our country, says this: the greatest problem we face is a nation where rancor and mistrust is the norm and half the country detests the other half. Until we break this underlying fever, none of us will get the country we want. For those of us who believe this, the great task before us is the work of repair. Vital work is ahead of us. There is a chapter here in Wisconsin. I'm not sure if it's in Milwaukee or Madison, but I'm tempted to start a chapter up in Appleton. It brings people together from opposite sides and they have real conversations. I can't change what's happened, but I can learn from it, and I can change how I respond. For me, being angry and afraid just doesn't help me. That's just who I am. Maybe for you, it's motivating, and I encourage you to use that then if it actually helps you. Personally, I want to stop our accepted social norm of dehumanizing the other. I want to stop fighting, and I want to start listening. May it be so, and amen.